Good morning, everyone, and happy Wednesday. We're so glad to have those of you who have joined us today for our presentation on combating cyber risk. I'm Sharon Francis, and I'm business advisor, for the Minority Business Assistance Center. And we are headquartered here at the Columbus Urban League and under the directorship of Jesse Mark III. So again, we just want to welcome you to our panel today, which will be led by MarKel Snyder, who is the managing partner of Fortis Cyber Solutions, as well as Sandra Moody-Gresham, who's a great friend and supporter of the MBAC of Dacon Insurance. And so we are glad to have them with us today. And I am going to turn it over to MarKel to lead us off. And I'm sure we'll be talking as we move forward. Enjoy.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for that introduction, Sharon. Just sound check, making sure that everyone can hear me this morning. So we're going to be taking you through this morning just a discussion on combating cyber risk and what you can really do as an entrepreneur in protecting your business. And there's a couple of things that I'm going to go through just on the technical side, being in the professional since 1994. And talking through just a series of items that we really feel you should understand to protect yourself and obviously protect your business. The first slide I always like starting off with really talks about the fact that all of our businesses have reputations. And I thought this was a really good quote, and I use these in a lot of my presentations, that talks about it takes 20 years to build that reputation in your business, but only a few minutes of a cyber incident can really ruin that and bring your business to the ground. So we want to talk about really cybersecurity as a whole, its impact, the different types of things that you need to be aware of, the different types of attacks. I'll take you through that. And then I'll also talk about some ways to mitigate that risk. Specifically, there's 5 things that we're going to touch on this morning. One is why we believe World War III is digital. What are those real vulnerabilities when you think about e-commerce in your business? What are the fastest growing cyber risk? And why you need incident response and business continuity planning, and even insurance products complementing those plans from that perspective. And then we're going to touch on kind of the latest cyber mitigation tools together. So first, let's start and really talk about why we believe World War III is digital. To start, let's go through just some of the statistics, right? So if you think about global cybercrime and actually the damage that it causes economically across the entire world, here's some really good statistics that we're all concerned about, right? So it costs $6 trillion a year across the world just in cybercrime alone, if you think about our businesses or our inability to do business or what's lost by way of data in business. So that's $190,000 a second when you think about cybercrime and its impact economically across the globe. Moreover, if you think about all of the things that are clear and present dangers across this world today, out of everything that could potentially impact or shut us down economically, cybersecurity failures, it's number 4 on the list. That's how significant it is, and that's how big of a risk it is to all of us globally. Now, thinking about that in more detail, there's 7 different types of what we call cyber warfare attacks that as professionals, we're constantly working to make sure that all of our networks and all of our technology infrastructure is truly hardened against. One is typical espionage. So you can think of all the James Bond movies, think about all your secret agents. That whole profession is now becoming digital and online. So the stealing of information, the stealing of bank accounts, the moving of money and these cryptocurrencies, they're all becoming a big part of modern day warfare. The second is sabotage, just the ability to take over a system take over technology, and actually shut it down from its intended use. We talk about number 3, which is denial of service attacks. What that literally means is think about your favorite website, or think about some of your social media sites. And literally what you can do using technology is shut down access to some of those key sites. So if you think about social services as an example, and how social services has gone digital, imagine a world to where you no longer have access to those social services because the technology has become unavailable due to cyber attack. The 4th is our electrical power grid. So we all need power. Unfortunately, there's so much technology now wrapped into our power grid that a lot of our cyber criminals are starting to really shut down these services. I think many of you are familiar with the attack on the pipeline down south in Texas, and its impact economically in the short amount of time that it was actually shut down via a ransomware attack. And we can talk more about that later in the presentation. Propaganda attacks, these are becoming big, not only politically, but personally to you as an individual. There are situations to where there's communication of information that's inaccurate out on the internet, and it becomes propagated across the internet. And what happens is it becomes quote unquote fake news. And I think we all have experienced the impact of fake news if you think about what has been happening politically, but it's starting to really scale to not only impact politics around the world, but also you and I individually or personally around the world. 6 is economic disruption. So again, if we think about just the use of you swiping a credit card every day and swiping that credit card and that information or that charge, your money going into someone else's bank account or an unintended bank account, those are real risks when you think about cybersecurity today, and even modern warfare when we start to talk about World War III as digital. And then the last is really surprise attacks. So things that you don't know that exist. So in the world of technology, there's something called the Internet of Things. And what that means is many of you now have smart devices in your homes. Your thermostat is smart. You've got Alexa in your home. And so there's ways in which cybersecurity criminals can actually deploy technologies or software to these devices, unbeknownst to you, and take advantage of those devices to really kind of facilitate cyber warfare. I found this quote really, really interesting. So this is research that was done by Gartner. And Gartner actually predicts that by 2024, so we're in 2022, so just in 2 years, 75% of CEOs will be held personally liable for cyber physical security incidents, excuse me. So think about that. So you're running your own business, you're a successful entrepreneur. What's really being predicted is by 2024, the liability associated with any cyber security incident within your organization, not only is your organization going to be responsible, but you as the individual running the organization is going to be personally responsible for that when you think about the economic impact. So that's significant. So let's learn a little bit more about these vulnerabilities. You know, when we talk about cyber warfare or why we believe that World War III will be digital, what are the real vulnerabilities in your business today when you think about e-commerce? And I'm going to go through some of these. Historically, everyone's familiar with antivirus, or what's now being known as malware. And what malware truly is unwanted software that's running on your computer, right? That is causing your computer to behave in a way that it's unintended. A lot of times you see this through simple ads. And as you go out and you surf the internet, what happens over time is that there is software that's actually stored and tracking all of the places that you visit on the internet. And what you may experience is your web browser or even your device itself sending you information that you never asked for. So that's how we're defining malware in this particular case as it relates to e-commerce. The second thing I want to talk about is just phishing. So phishing is technically, in most cases, receiving an email, an unwanted email, where they're asking you for some personally identifiable information. So whether that's bank account information, your social security numbers, but sensitive information that you don't actually want to put in the hands of someone that should not have that information. Phishing emails in particular come from unknown entities, but look like everyday entities you may interact with, like your institute of banking as a great example. And it may ask you to enter your account information or even directly for your bank account information. So ultimately what's happening is that these types of attacks are getting really sophisticated and sending communication, and how they actually write that communication to mimic communication that you may get from maybe some legit business entity that you're interacting with. The next is called spear phishing. And spear phishing, again, is related to email. And what a spear phishing attack truly is capturing information, maybe personally identifiable information you may already have in your inbox, right? And so someone may have actually gained access to your inbox by gaining access to your username and your password, and then taking that information and obviously reusing that in a way that it wasn't intended. The next piece we want to talk about is man-in-the-middle attack. What that literally means is that many times, let's say you go out to Starbucks, you're on your phone or you're on your computer, and you actually get on their Wi-Fi. And by getting on their Wi-Fi, there's someone else sitting in that cafe or that restaurant that's also on that Wi-Fi, but they've put some malicious code out on that network that is pulling information down from your device in Starbucks, as an example, just because you wanted to use that public Wi-Fi. Next is denial of service attack. So a denial of service attack simply is flooding a particular address on the internet. So if you think about your favorite website and going out to that website, let's use Twitter as an example, twitter.com. If you go out to twitter.com using your internet browser and it just spins and the information doesn't come back, that's a symptom of a denial of service attack. Excuse me. And what that is as a cyber criminal, they can basically flood that URL, if you will, with a bunch of unintended requests for information until that site shuts down technically. And you've seen that throughout the course of the last few years, even during COVID, with some of our largest providers, whether it be Instagram or Twitter specifically. The next type of cybersecurity attack is SQL injection. This is a little technical, but what it literally means is that a cyber criminal can actually hack their way into the technology. And as you enter information from your web browser and you send that back to an institution like a bank, the cyber criminal can act like the bank, right? Receive that information, and instead of storing it at the institution, actually steal that information and either resell that on the dark web or reuse that to get into your bank and actually take money from your account specifically. The next threat is what's called a zero-day exploit. So a lot of times what happens is vendors are constantly coming out with new software. Sometimes cyber criminals can actually gain access to that software before it's distributed to the public and change the code of that software before it's distributed, so that when it's distributed, instead of that software being used as intended, it actually is going to be rerouted to the cyber criminals in that attack. So these happen all the time, especially with large MSPs. There was a big issue with a managed service provider that had some software that a lot of organizations were using, including the federal government. And that software got deployed, and all of the information that it was routing or supposed to be routing to customer databases, in this case, was actually getting routed to a criminal organization. So this is a very, very significant security risk, and one that we all need to be aware of. The next is what we call advanced persistent threats. So a lot of times what this is this is either a socio-political group that has a group of hackers and they take over a particular part of a government. So think about Russian attacks or attacks from Ukraine here in the United States. We all read about those or hear about those. So these are really organized attacks where there are groups of cyber criminals that are really just taking over systems and controlling those systems in a way that whoever created the system, like the government agency, didn't intend that system to be used in that way. Next is ransomware, and I'm sure everyone is familiar with ransomware. So this is specific software that actually is installed on your local device. It takes control of that device, and the only way that you can gain control of that device or that computer network is to actually pay the ransom, which many times is in a cryptocurrency. But once that happens, they usually give you a code, a PIN, or a password that then unlocks your system and you can recover that access to your data. And then last but not least, which is similar to a denial of service attack, is a specific DNS attack. And that's a little technical, but what that means is if I'm going to twitter.com, I can actually get through to twitter.com, but the content that's being relayed to me is not the content that's actually produced by Twitter, because that domain name is now getting redirected somewhere else. So these are all ways in which cyber criminals orchestrate cyber attacks and really create this sense of threat across the landscape of technology. So as a business owner and running your business and really living in a world in which there's this considerable risk, what are the things that you can do? So in working with Gartner, there's a couple of really good new age technology solutions that are being established that you can start to leverage. One is what's called a cybersecurity mesh. And what that really starts to articulate is the ability for all of your solutions. So whether they're locally deployed, what we call on-premise, or deployed in the cloud, there's now technology that's smart enough to kind of understand, using artificial intelligence, behaviors of these technologies that may indicate some cybersecurity risk. So the technology is getting smarter to begin to communicate and educate you as a business owner on maybe the risk that's in your configuration, the risk in using a certain vendor. But the technology is getting smarter so that now, as business owners, we can be alerted and aware of when our business starts to leverage technology that may be at risk. The second piece that I wanted to talk about this morning were cyber savvy boards. And these are, again, using artificial intelligence, specific hardware solutions that really protect us from many of the attacks that I articulated earlier. The third piece is vendor consolidation. So a lot of times we have just a myriad of vendors, whether they be in the cloud or just in everyday business, our partners that we're working with, and they all have their own technology solutions. So this creates just a considerable amount of risk. So one strategy simply is to consolidate all of those relationships that you have to mitigate your risk. 4 is what we call identity first security. So before we allow anyone to gain access, you see a lot of this in two-factor authentication, to where we're now requiring you to not only enter a password, but to also enter, let's say, your cell phone number. And what we do before we allow you to access an application or a technology is that we force you to enter your password, and then we force you to enter a code that we actually send to your cell phone. So one of the things that we're very, very aware of as professionals is making sure that there's 1, 2, 3 ways to actually verify a person's identity before giving them access to the technology. The 5th piece is just managing machine identities. So each machine has their own fingerprint, if you will. And so a lot of times as a cybersecurity professional, what we want to do is understand, right, and protect that fingerprint before we start to interact with a like machine to accomplish a particular code instruction or a particular task as it relates to technology. So this particular approach to cybersecurity is really starting to become more prevalent so that machines are smart enough to understand other devices in which they need to be communicating and working with in real time. 6, one of the things we talk about is remote work is not just work anymore. Because of COVID, obviously, a lot of us have been sent out of the office and we're working from home. So taking time to really train and educate all of our employees, all of our business partners on how to appropriately interact with our technologies, with our data, is just a huge trend that we're really starting to move to in the profession. 7 is breach and attack simulation. So fire drilling, just making sure that everyone in the organization is aware of what an attack potentially could look like and how we need to respond as an organization. So we do a lot of tabletop drilling on setting up different scenarios in different parts of corporate organizations and businesses, small businesses in particular, just to give you a sense of what it will feel like to your organization culturally to experience a particular breach. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was just privacy enhancing. So using some computation techniques to kind of enhance your privacy. And what we really mean by that are things like encryption. What I really like to talk to our clients about is laptop use and ensuring that all of the data on your laptop is encrypted. It's making sure that your passwords are encrypted at rest is what we call it, and also in transit. So there are specific computational technologies or algorithms that we use to actually make sure that this is happening for each of our clients and customers in the profession. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about before I handed things over to Sandra was just business continuity and what it is and why it's important. And I'm going to give you kind of the front end explanation of what this aspect of business truly is. And then I'm going to hand it over to Sandra with a pause for questions so that she can really start talking through kind of the insurance and how to protect your business as it relates to some of the practices you would put in your business. So let's talk a little bit about business continuity first. So when you think of business continuity from a cybersecurity perspective, there are 4 things that we typically do in the profession. One is we want to understand what's the impact of a cybersecurity incident to your organization. How do you recover from that? What are your recovery strategies? How do you actually develop a plan, right, based on the anticipated impact and the anticipated recovery strategy? And then you've got to test and maintain that plan over time in a business. So a lot of the work that we do, we actually come into an organization and we facilitate audits. And those audits look at all the type of technologies that you use, whether they be on premise or in the cloud, what they're used for. We have a specific methodology that we use from a government organization called NIST that really allows us to prioritize and understand which of the systems or technologies that you're using have the greatest impact to your business. So then from that, we go through prioritization. We talk about recovery strategies. What do you really need to do to recover from a particular type of incident? We develop a formal plan, which in many cases is needed to get access to insurance products, maybe even access to capital. They're starting to ask some of these questions to really kind of protect their investment. And then what we show these organizations is that as we work with businesses, we're ensuring that they're constantly testing and maintaining and updating this plan in real time. So that's what we call business continuity. And that's really what we use as a technique or a methodology to combat a lot of the cyber risk. So with that being said, let's pause for some questions. And then I'm going to turn everything over to Sandra.
Thank you, MarKel. This was, my goodness, very informative information that you gave. And I put a question in the chat for you if you wouldn't mind responding to it, because I know we have a lot of small businesses that are our clients and some of them that are home-based. So they may not have sophisticated um, protection systems outside of maybe like an antivirus software like Norton. Wanted to know if that's still considered effective. And I know that often they're always upselling you on additional add-ins. And are they recommended? And how would that actually even affect our system efficiency? So it's kind of a three-pronged question, but I wanted to kind of put that out there and hopefully start
Sure.
the conversation.
Sure. So I think antivirus is kind of the foundation. It's kind of the base. And antivirus software has matured to being used not only for antivirus, but anti-malware. So for instance, we use antivirus and anti-malware in businesses, but we also have what's called a security operations center, to where we now have security analysts that when we deploy antivirus software, anti-malware software, there's artificial intelligence that's giving us alerts of what's happening in all the technologies in your environment. And behind the scenes, we're constantly fighting those attacks. So it's way more sophisticated today than simply just buying antivirus software. I still recommend that you have it, but there's a couple of pieces that you would need in addition to that, even as a small business. One is you definitely need an incident response plan to understand what you would do in case of an incident. And then two is you need to have somebody that's really in your organization or a partner that's actually managing what that software is communicating to you on your device or even on your network within your environment. So one of the biggest disconnects is many small businesses feel like they don't need to make that investment until it's too late. So until you have a ransomware attack, and now there's a different scenario because you're engaging us to try to recover data that you've already lost or you've already given away. So we encourage organizations to be much more proactive. That answers your question, Sharon.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, do we have any other questions from our attendees? So glad to see you all that have joined us today. This is, again, some powerful information, and I'm telling you that World War III scenario and talking about the various ways that we're seeing these attacks coming upon, not only us, it's as businesses, but as individuals, governments. It's kind of daunting. So definitely we want to give you an opportunity. Okay. And if not, we'll just pass it on to Sandra. Welcome, Sandra.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much, Sharon, for your work and support for us on this effort. You know, what we're finding out, you need to have almost an IT professional and with one of those professional services that you have for your organization. They're becoming almost equally as important as having a banker. Because at the level and the more advances in technology we'll see in that, as a business who is growing and trying to stay relevant, we're going to have to employ many of these new technologies, but simultaneously you're going to have a professional working with you to make sure these systems are secure, that you're protecting your information as well as that of your customers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about cyber liability insurance. There are protocols in the space that MarKel mentioned, like the multi-factor authentication and the malware protections that was just talked about. So there are things you have to do from a hardware, software strategy, but also insurance is one of those tools that you should and start to consider purchasing to help in case there is a risk or a claim in this space. We're also seeing vendors, your larger corporations, the state of Ohio, these vendors and your customers are requiring levels of cybersecurity. Just yesterday, we have a client, they currently have $1 million of cyber liability. the vendor that they were doing business with requires them to have 2 million. So this is becoming a common ask, just like general liability is. So it's important now for businesses to start to look at this to make sure that they're prepared and positioned when opportunities come. MarKel, next slide, please. So one of the points MarKel mentioned earlier, these breaches are really about personal identifiable information or personal health information. So you'll see the terms PII or PHI. So that what is a data breach? It's really the compromise of one of those pieces of information. And it usually happens 2 ways, either from outside rogue, outside criminals, or inside through rogue employees, right? Next slide, please. So these are examples of personal identifiable information. And if you operate a business, we may have access to this. If you're doing business on the internet, there is a risk and exposure of this. So everybody, every business is doing interactions and transactions on the internet. So this is the risk and exposure that you really have vulnerabilities around. Next. So what data breach and cyber liability does is helps you provide the resources in the case of a claim due to a breach of PII or PHI. And these policies really provide you a technology professional or a cyber specialist who negotiate these claims for you. They consult pre-claim to help you make sure you have all the protocols in place, but they help post-claim, either providing the dollars that have now been lost or compromised, and they also provide a variety of things. What's listed here are some of those coverages. So just kind of brief example of what these mean. So that network and information security liability, this is if you're sued because of a breach, right? And the impact to your customers. So you fail to protect and secure that data, right? There are regulations around the state that require you to notify any and all of your customers that a breach may have occurred. So all of us have probably received letters or correspondence from banks, insurance companies, Target, other large entities that notify us that say your data could have likely been compromised. The law says you have to notify every customer. So there is an expense in doing that. And you also can offer credit monitoring. Ransomware was mentioned, and this is extortion. And these policies will negotiate with the extortionist, and if it's deemed the most effective resolve is to pay the ransom, the insurance policy will pay that ransom in the type of currency desired, if it's crypto or what have you. MarKel mentioned our reputation, right? So there's coverage that will assist and consultants that will assist that business in rebuilding, restoring your reputation. I think some of the most important coverages here is this business interruption. If you can't operate because of that breach, your business is shut down, you now have lost revenue and you have incurred expenses to rebuild your systems and your infrastructure. Policies pay for loss of income as well as those expenses needed to restore your operations. Social engineering, this fits around the term that MarKel mentioned, phishing, where you get bogus emails that impersonate another individual directing or instructing you to make a transaction. These are becoming much more prevalent, and what the policy will do will pay if there was lost funds because of that incident. It will pay those funds that were lost in a transaction up to the limits on your policy. There are fines and penalties when there are personal identifiable information breaches. So again, that's an expense to that organization. There's data restoration where you, if you need professionals to help restore your systems back. You may have to upgrade with software and hardware. There are dollars made available for that. And certainly the coaches that are available to help prior to a claim occurring, but certainly throughout that claims process. You know, I like to say you are just, with these policies, you are hiring another consultant. Your premium provides access to professionals to help you lessen the likelihood of a loss occurring, but certainly work with you through that process, right? I am not a tech specialist by any means. I'm certainly learning it as we're having to implement these new systems. But, you know, my expertise is over here. Let me hire the professionals. And in this case, your premiums pay for those professionals. Next slide, please. So the industry has tightened up on the availability to buy this coverage, and primarily because of the losses that they begin to see. What they have found is that when an organization has multi-factor authentication, that breach is, you know, almost 90% less likely to occur. That has now become a requirement. In order to secure cyber liability coverage, you have to have multi-factor authentication. You have to have firewalls, a backup system, a recovery plan and business continuity plan. How do you restore and get back operational if something happens? So these are requirements now that every business has to have in place before you can even purchase cyber liability. 2 years ago, that wasn't the case, right? So we're seeing this become much more difficult to secure. But the beauty is you get to work with people and organizations like MarKel's firm that help small businesses get there. And it's not as expensive as you would think, right? So we've had to go through this process with my firm in putting these tools in place. We had cyber coverage a few years back when it was easier to get and renew, but then as you renewed, that carriers wanted to see that you have implemented these strategies. So there are resources and firms like MarKel's organization really walk you through these things. It looks very complicated, but as you get involved in the process, it's really an eye-opener for you to see where your gaps are and where your vulnerabilities are, and then to begin to really address them. Next slide. So I got a couple of examples kind of make this hit reality. So this was a problematic employee. They found out they were going to be terminated. So they stole account records of the company, right? Employee, their customer records, I'm sorry. Then the terminated employee put that information out on the internet. So the customer sued the business for invasion of privacy. Again, this would be a covered expense on that cyber policy. It would pay the legal fees and any damages. Next. This is an online clothing retailer, and they had a data breach. A hacker entered their website or their systems and stole the credit card numbers of 500,000 of their customers. The the company hired an investigator to determine what was wrong. And they learned that that criminal had been in their system for more than 6 months. So as you can imagine, that's a long time for someone to be just pulling your information. So this was a huge loss also. And the last one, next please. The last one actually happened to us and just about 2 weeks ago. So one of my employees who was on maternity leave had her laptop hacked, and they had access to her business email. So they sent, the criminal sent an email to me actually requesting that she wanted to update her bank account for her payroll direct deposit. I didn't look at it. I just sent her the form that she needed to complete to update this information. A couple hours later, the criminal sent the form back, and I sent it on up to our payroll provider. The following morning, we had our sales meeting, and the young lady joined the call, and she said, Sandra, I need to reach out to you to update my bank information. I said, well, you just did that. You sent it to me yesterday. And she just had a baby, so lack of sleep. So I kind of teased her, maybe you just, a little in a fog and didn't realize you did it. And she said she did not. We sent her what I received. And of course, then I looked at the document. It had a bank in Arizona, and it was not her signature. So we were able to get it stopped before it went through any of her payroll, because it was like the next day, right? So if there was a longer time in there, that could have been a real issue. So that was an example of social engineering. And again, if her paycheck went somewhere else, depending on the size of coverage that you have and the size of that loss, the social engineering on the policy would have reimbursed the company for that loss. So this stuff is real. It's happening every day, happening more so to smaller businesses, because we often don't have all of the security and protection around. And I think I've done a fairly good job of trying to implement these tools, but these criminals are smart and they're persistent. Next slide, please. So we're gonna, and if you go to the next slide, MarKel, there is a question in the chat. If someone just wanna open their mic and ask that question. So it looks like we have a couple questions there. So read this one. Can cybersecurity liability coverage be added to one's homeowner's policy? That's a good question. Right now, we're not seeing personal homeowner carriers added.
Right.
They do have, just some soft coverages that if your data was stolen, they will provide you a couple $100 to change your locks, or some time off where you have to go get a new ID and that. But that's the only kinds of coverage that they provide. But you don't really see it right now on the homeowner policy. And then the next question, if you outsource your site, shopping cart, and do not store customer, do you recommend a policy? That's a good question. And I think MarKel can kind of chime in on this one. What I advise is you want to know how that third-party vendor protects you and your business, right? Because the customer is going to sue you because they know you, right? They may not know your vendor or the supplier you're using. So it's twofold. They're going to sue you, but then you're going to have to see what levels of protection does the vendor provide, because did the breach occur because of the vendor system? So I think you have to spend a lot of time understanding these vendor contracts and how they protect you. So my answer is saying, yes, you probably still need some coverage. And MarKel, you may want to add on to that.
Sure. I mean, Zuri, I totally agree with Sandra. I mean, the reality of it is that most of these organizations in their contracts, they're indemnified. And what that means is that you buy a right to use or license their technology, but they are not responsible for any cybersecurity breach. That's really how these contracts are truly written. So I would encourage you to make sure that you read that fine print and understand what your risk and liability truly is. But in 80% of cases, we would recommend that you get a policy.
Yeah, great question.
And then I think there's a question before that we didn't answer from Janine. That was about cloud-based apps. I'm an accountant with tons of PII, and I exclusively recommend them with a password manager and two-factor authentication setup. So let's talk a little bit about cloud-based apps. I think the biggest challenge with cloud-based applications today is the contractual relationship that you have, excuse me. And like I was just reiterating to Zuri, 9 times out of 10, you are licensing the right to use the technology. And so when you think of cyber attack, it really comes down to the application of the use of that technology. So let me give you a really specific example that we've gone through with some customers. So let's say that I'm using, and I'll just use an accounting system as an example, since we're talking about accounting. I'm using an accounting system online, and I elect to turn on their two-factor authentication, and we're using password technology, but I actually have a device that's connecting to that. And I decided to save all of that information locally on that device, which many of us do because we tire of entering our passwords time after time. What happens is that liability passes directly on to you as the purchaser to license that technology. So you may configure the technology that you're licensing to be secured. But when it comes down to the breach, like Sandra said, your customer is going to come to you. They're going to pursue you. And then your pursuit of that third-party vendor is going to be tied directly to the contract that you have in place. So you still have to have these processes, policies, techniques, and technologies in place, even on your side of that equation when you think about cloud apps, because you don't have any real recourse when it comes to your licensing agreement of the software in the cloud. So we spend a lot of time helping businesses harden their laptops and desktops and their network environments. And I'll just give you a great example. And Sandra, we can just talk through this in our relationship. The value of having a firewall in place. A lot of times, smaller businesses don't even understand that they need that investment, because they'll build a relationship with an internet service provider and assume, right, that their traffic to the internet is actually protected, which in most cases it's not. You don't have a firewall in place, right? So if you have some type of security breach with a cloud application, the first question that's going to be asked is, are you protected on premise? And your answer is going to be no, or I don't know, right? So these are things that we spend our time educating small businesses on to understand their risk. And I hope that answers your question, Janine and Zuri.
Other questions or thoughts? Did you find this information valuable? Was there anything you learned you didn't know before?
Well, I did.
So I'm sorry, Sharon, can you repeat that?
No, I was saying I certainly did, and I'm giving everybody a chance. If they want to unmute themselves, they can, certainly, as we're wrapping up this session. But again, we appreciate everybody that's on this call, and MarKel and Sandra, the information that you provided, I think is just critical, particularly during this time. So yes, if anybody wants to chime in, feel free to unmute yourself. You're able to chime in.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was very awesome. I do want to say that I have been breached before as a business owner, and it was based on a financial institution. And you're right, that recovery is devastating, and trying to get the organizations to really get back to you about that is a nightmare. So yes, I would agree that any business owner, no matter what business you're in, you want to make sure that you take all of these precautions from the spyware on down to the insurance products, because it's a very important procedure to have, a process, and it's just devastating to have to think about it when the time is at hand. Thank you
Absolutely.
again for this awesome information.
Thank you, Ms. Sunita, for sharing that. I also want to mention that there's an article that I've written on cyber risk, and a document that will help you understand the various coverages that are provided in a cyber policy. So you will be receiving that from Ms. Sharon, I guess in the next couple of days. And then also you guys have probably heard about the metaverse and the next internet coming, but there's a great article we found on that really talks about what levels of cyber risk will be enhanced because of moving into this space. I like to say we're moving to the Jetsons. That's I'm telling y'all my age, anybody remember that?
With you.
We'll make sure you guys get that. If you're interested in the metaverse article, just shoot MarKel or myself an email, and we'll make sure you get that as well. But it's been a pleasure being here. And
Excellent.
again, we hope this information has been valuable. And feel free to reach out if we could ever help.
Great. And I think Janine, you unmuted yourself. Did you want to give us a comment?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to both of you for the presentation. I'm an accountant, so I have a whole layer of stuff that I have to do internally, and then layering these systems on top of that, and not only in-house with me, but at my clients and at my vendors, because, we got personal information flying everywhere. So yes, thank you for this information. It's very helpful.
Great.
You're welcome.
Yes,
Absolutely. Thank you again, everybody, for participating. Again, on behalf of the Minority Business Assistance Center, we want to make sure that you are all taking advantage of the opportunities that we're making available to you. We have some upcoming trainings that we want to invite you. Next week, we'll be talking about factoring and how you can use generate cash flow using your accounts receivable. Then on the 24th, we'll be talking with grant writer and consultant Stephanie Bridges about let's get in front of the money. So if this is something that you're interested in to help support your business, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, I think it'll be worthwhile to participate in that webinar. That's on the 24th of February. And then during the month of March, we will be starting our industry-specific classes where we will be doing trainings on specific types of businesses. On the 2nd, we'll start off with our food service businesses. So we'll be targeting them. And we also have construction following that. And then there are several others. So just keep posted to our weekly newsletter so that you can find out what's coming down the pike. But again, we do appreciate you being in today's session. And thank you again to our panelists for an excellent job as always. And so everybody be safe. And look for my email that will have the recording of today's session, as well as the information that Sandra has spoken that we will share with you. All right, have a great morning, good afternoon, be safe.